We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us Kon Bouzikos. Did I say your name right? Bouzikos. Very good.
Correct.
Kon is actually joining us I'm on the East Coast of the United States, and Kon is on the East Coast of Australia in Melbourne, correct?
Correct. Yes,
Unbelievable.
very far away.
Welcome. What technology does to bring us together. We're excited to hear a bit about what Kon is up to in the world of classical education. But before we do that, I always like to hear a little bit more about our guests from a personal standpoint. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your education, and your career.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I want to speak to yourself and to your guests. A little bit about myself. I'm a teacher. I work in high schools at the moment. I've been teaching for over 23 years. During those 23 years, I worked in primary schools. I worked in high schools.
Now, I want to make sure we're using the same language. When you say high schools, you mean 9th through 12th grade in American
Correct.
lingo? And primary school would be what we would say grammar school, kindergarten through 6th grade?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I know we have terminology that can be a little bit misleading with the way you would use the term college, for example.
Thank you. Yes, so I've worked in both education. Now, I've worked in different types of schools. We have here public schools or state schools. We also have private schools, or some people prefer the term independent schools, which are faith-based schools, whether they be Christian or other denominations. So I've worked in both settings. Currently, I'm working in a faith-based school here in Melbourne, teaching religious education and humanities. I'm also, Marlon, a Sunday school teacher. I've been doing Sunday school for the last 22 years, so I really enjoy my Sunday weekly lessons at my local parish. I've also been involved a lot with youth ministry at my local church, whether it be youth fellowships, Bible studies, just bringing the word of God to young people. I live in Melbourne, as you said. I'm actually Greek background. I'm fluent in Greek and in the English language. I love running. I have done some marathons during my lifetime, Marlon. Some people think I'm crazy.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
I love reading books. Thank you. I love reading books. I love spending time with people. I love cooking, walking, and just in the last 5-6 years, just this classical Christian education, which I'm always indebted to America, especially. Yeah, I'm really involved with that in the last 6 years of my life. I have studied. I went to Monash University in Melbourne. I have a master's in education. I have a Bachelor of Arts. I have a diploma in theology. I'm a keen learner. I'm always learning. I never stop learning, never stop reading. And yeah, that's a little bit about my background. And yes, yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you. One of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you is because you have become the founder or the co-founder of something that is called ACES, and we'll have you talk about that a little bit in just a moment, the Australian Classical Education Society. For the coming year, and we realize our school year typically starts in September, and in Australia, the school year typically starts around the end of January or beginning of February, because we're dealing with a different time frame for summer for students to be off and enjoying the outdoors. But we thought it was time. We've been offering, I think we were last year up to about 60 classes that were offered in our evening hours or your daytime hours as a way of being friendly to that. And we have increased that dramatically to where people who want to be part of our online school at Veritas Scholars Academy, a part of Veritas Press, where they can take live classes with us. And we are because of being online, we have teachers all over the world and students all over the world, and it's really a neat mix, and we're seeing that grow dramatically, and the interest is in it. So I was interested in hearing more about what you were doing and helping you know more about what we're doing with that, because I think it creates some opportunities for the homeschool community. And even we have a lot of schools that will join us too. When they need a teacher to teach something, we have it, and they don't. It's something we can do. But tell us what motivated you to start ACES. When did it start? What is, give us a little bit of the history.
Yes. ISIS began in 2021. It began here in Melbourne, and it began with just a discussion between some teachers about classical education. And that discussion then started to include more people, Marlon. And from Melbourne, it went to people that live in other states. So at the moment, I'm very delighted and pleased to say to yourself and to your listeners that ACES is made up of mostly teachers, academics, parents, people involved in the churches, ministers, lay ministers. It's made up of people who are looking for an alternative to what's the current model of education is being offered here in Australia, the progressive model of education. Many people are just disillusioned at the moment, Marlon, and are seeking a better alternative. So that's the reason why we created ACES, because we want to show parents, we want to tell the story about what it is to be classically educated. Now, even though many of us, including myself, have not been classically trained or educated, Marlon, we are, like you said, we are on a journey, and that was one of the reasons why we created ACES. We want to offer opportunities, and I'm glad you mentioned your online courses. We are always looking for opportunities where people can listen to those who know a little bit more about the movement. And we always look to people in your country because, let's be honest, it's been happening a much larger period of time in America. Here in Australia, it's probably been around for the last maybe 5, 6, maybe 7, maybe even 10 years, I would say up to 10 years. It's been happening as a movement. So that was, I hope that's the answer to your question. We want to be able to just allow people to explore it. And the other thing we want to do is create schools.
Yeah,
And I'm sure we'll get that to the discussion. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, one of the things that I'll say then is our involvement, my wife and Laurie and I have been involved with classical education since we read Wilson's book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, which I think is the seminal work in the resurgence of an interest in classical education. It was certainly the most important thing in changing our approach. We then took the initiative to start the Geneva School in Orlando, Florida, and Veritas Academy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now Veritas Scholars Academy, our online school, and Veritas Press. So we've been actively involved since 1992 for us. And so it's been quite a long time. And one of the things that I can tell you now, so that you can tell the people that you work with, is in America, it is the fastest growing category of education, and it is the one that easily gets the best results by any form of measurement that I can think of. Standardized testing is one of the objective numbers in college boards, and those numbers for, on average, the classically educated far exceed our public school system, and they exceed virtually all of our private school systems as well. So I know that your interest comes from that, but I wanted you to know, and you to have here on the record as we talk, that verification that it is proving to be a superior form of education. But it requires some definition. When we use the term classical education, we will use it interchangeably with the term classical Christian education. That's not always the case for everyone. It's true at Veritas. But tell me, when you use the term classical education, and don't say classical Christian education, tell me, are you making a distinction, or what is it that you mean?
Yes. That's a great question. And if you look at the title of our organisation, it's Australian Classical Education Society. Well, first and foremost, Marlon, when we use the term classical education for us here at ACES, it basically means the great tradition, starting with the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, looking at Plato, Aristotle, and we look at the beginnings and what those authors and philosophers thought education should be about. So we begin with them. However, having said that, Marlon, we realise that the classical education movement, even though it began in Greece, it took a trajectory. It spread throughout Europe, as you know very well, and it was part of the Christian world. We can't deny that, and hence we get the term classical Christian education. So we at ACES, we are open to any perspective, any position. I must say that most of us here on ACES, in fact, I think all of us are Christians. We are all Christians. So first and foremost, we would like to say that for a classical education to really reach its apex, to really flourish, in order for the people to flourish in it, the students, that we believe that it should reach the Christian lens. It should reach the Christian story. However, having said that, Marlon, we respect and we understand that we live in a multicultural society. That's a term we use here in Australia a lot. I'm sure they use it in America. We live in a multicultural, multi-faith society, and we realise that there are people that perhaps are not Christians or may follow another denomination. So our position, Marlon, is that we are open to dialogue with those persons, as we always keep the door open. However, we do not deny that we are Christians, and we believe that ultimately classical education finds its true meaning when it becomes a classical Christian education. Now, I realize that some people may disagree with what I'm saying, or may hold, Marlon, a different perspective. And look, we respect that. In fact, as a Christian, I respect every person I meet. I respect you. I've just met you now, So, but that's our frame.
Okay, thank you. There's another aspect that something's happened. Doug Wilson's book was the real significant first work to come out, called Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, and aptly named because it was named after a talk that was then turned into an essay by Dorothy Sayers given at Oxford University in 1947 or 48, and that's called The Lost Tools of Learning. Sayers articulates a very significant pedagogical model. And one of the things that's happened in America with the popularization of classical education in the late 20th and now 21st century was that there has become a plethora, quite a variety of expressions of classical education. Sayers points out that the first three of the 7 liberal arts, also known as the trivium, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, parallel very neatly how God made children to learn. In grammar school, or primary school, as I think you would call it, kindergarten through 6th grade, they're quite capable memorizers. They love to memorize things. They drink in things. They acquire knowledge very easily, and they love it. They also need to learn to master language, and of course, master mathematics basics. So she points out that that's a wonderful time to teach Latin, and that was very common in medieval times because it was a tool for mastering language that was recognized quite significantly until the early 20th century in America. I don't know the history of Australia with regard to Latin, but it's key in our thinking of classical education. Then she points out a child becomes pert, maybe argumentative in the middle school or junior high school years, or the early secondary school years, we'll say 7th through 9th grade. They become argumentative, and that's the logic stage or the dialectic stage, and they love to argue. So she says that's the time to teach them logic, teach them to argue well, a dangerous thing to do. But nevertheless, it's teaching with the grain because that's what they want. That's what they're naturally inclined to. Then in the high school years, they start to care about how they're perceived, and that's when she says it's time to teach rhetoric, teach an understanding, and teach their ability to express themselves. We have found that to be a model that Wilson articulates quite well, and that we really believe, and that's how Veritas pursues classical Christian education. How would it be the case for ACEs and for you and your constituents? What flavor, what brand, so to speak, of classical education are you interested in promoting?
Yes, yes. We at ACES are also familiar with Sayer's article and also with the works of Douglas Wilson. So yes, we definitely agree that grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the different stages of the child's development are areas that we need to be aware of as we seek to grow this movement. And in fact, I'm glad you asked that question. You raised that, Marlon, because in some of these classical schools that are emerging in Australia, they do actually emphasize those terms: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. They do emphasize, especially in the younger years, the primary, as you mentioned earlier. So yes, so we are aware of that, and I would say, as ACES, we wholeheartedly agree with the stages of the trivium and how they need to be incorporated when we're planning our lessons, as we're creating our units of work. So that obviously we respect that. But I just want to say, we still have a lot of work to do in that area, in terms of curriculum, in terms of encapsulating those three terms, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, as you said, Marlon, into the Australian curriculum, showing where we can create those opportunities. But yes, we are aware of the different strands in America, and we know that there are certain people, like you said, Marlon, who support the say. There are some people who may support some other aspects of the movement. So we're open to all perspective, Marlon. As I said, here in Australia, we're learning. We're just learning, and we're asking questions, Marlon, and sometimes I'll be honest, we don't always have the answers here in Australia, but we're just seeking further guidance.
Yeah. Okay. What as you pursue the initiatives through ACES, what are some of the plans that you have? What does success and ultimately what does success look like? What would you say if you were to move the clock forward 20 years and look back and say that was successful? What would that be?
Okay. Well, 20 years from now, I hope and I pray that we can, first of all, have created schools. Just have created schools across all the cities in Australia. That's the first thing. At the moment, not all our capital cities, not all our states in Australia, Marlon, have classical schools. Only some states in Australia at the moment are catching on to this classical Christian education movement. That's the first thing. Number two, I'm hoping that we can have a curriculum. We can have a detailed, like I said to you in your original question, a detailed, coherent curriculum that we can share with any school in any state in Australia. So that is a mammoth task. So I'm hoping 20 years from now, we have been successful, to answer your question, in creating that curriculum from kindergarten, Marlon, right up to year 12, which is the year before students go to university in this country. So that's a huge task. Successful also in Australia will mean that we have conferences, we have seminars, daily, weekly, monthly. At the moment, let me just say this to yourself and Marlon, we do have some conferences and seminars here in Australia, but it might happen maybe once a year. It might be, and there might be, Marlon, maybe 50 people. 50 people from around Australia. Now, when someone hears the number 50, they might not think much, but 50 for us is a huge achievement. So 20 years from now, I wish I can say to you, Marlon, that we now have 300 people that come to our conference. So hopefully each year we can add another 10 more people, Marlon, and we can get to 100, and then 150, then 200. But having said that, I'm not just after numbers. I'm also after quality. I hope that the people that lead this when I leave this world, Marlon, I hope that the people that come after me, I hope that they have the right sentiment and they have the right attitude towards class education, which is one of love, one of dialogue. And I always mention the word love. If we can't love one another, if we can't see the image and likeness of God in that other person that we speak to, then we've really lost the plot. And maybe that might be a bit hard, but we really need to imitate our Lord. So let's start with love, dialogue, and let's also start with we don't know everything. Now, I always say to people, I don't know everything. I'm not embarrassed to say that. It's not a weakness. So let's start with that attitude and how I can learn more. Right now, I've learned so many things from you, Marlon. Just listening to you speak and your questioning, I've learned so many things. So we're hoping to have people like yourself, Marlon, that can lead. So we're hoping to have leaders, conferences. Obviously, we want schools, like I mentioned to you before, and a curriculum. I would say they're probably the four main goals that we want to I want to finish with this, Marlon. I want more Christian pastors
Yeah.
to understand
Yeah.
why we need classical Christian schools. At the moment, we haven't really convinced many. Very few, I must say, but I'm hoping in 20 years, it could be 100. I can say we've convinced 100 priests about why we need to go down classical Christian education. That's my goal, Marlon,
Yeah.
and the goal of ASIS.
Well, you talked about creating a curriculum, and back in 1992, when we were getting started, and when the book had just come out a year or two before, there were virtually no available curricula that were distinctly committed to classical Christian pedagogy. But now in America, Veritas Press, our business, is a very substantial producer of curriculum. There are a handful of other very important curricula. Have you considered joining forces with what has been created already rather than reinventing it?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, we want to learn from others what they have done. However, having said that, and I've said this to other people too in your country, we always want to make sure, man, I'll say this slowly, that our curriculum has an Australian context, an Australian background. Um, Even though there are a lot of similarities between America and Australia, we have to remember that at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our curriculum does not sound, and I say this with all love, does not sound too American, and I don't say that in a derogative way. I love America, but we want to show that Australian flavor, if you get my point, in that curriculum.
Yeah.
Because some people sometimes say, look, we've seen the American curriculum and we admire, we love the materials, but they say to me, but it's just too American. But they say that in a nice way.
Yeah.
We don't see any Australian element in that curriculum. And I go, first of all, you've got to understand that they're Americans, we're Australians, so which is, so does that make sense? Yeah, I hope you
Well, of
understand
course,
my answer to
yeah.
your question.
I'll be the first.
So we want to.
I've never
Yeah.
traveled in your country, and my interactions with people who are Australian are not insignificant. We had actually a basketball player from Melbourne, Australia, who was the center on the North Carolina State University basketball team, was roommates with one of my children. And for holidays, he came for Thanksgiving and Christmas. He routinely came to our home to celebrate our holidays with us. So I got to know a little bit about that then. And of course, I've had a number of interactions with Australian classical educators and innovators and that sort of thing. And so I can't say that I know much, but I do appreciate and understand that there is a difference in how one might teach history and how one might teach certain things. I wonder if that would be as true, though, for logic and rhetoric and Latin and other things that are pretty well established that don't seem to me, but I don't know, because I I'm swimming in this water. So somebody from outside it may say, no, that's pretty Americanized. But I wonder if those kinds of curricula, great books curriculum, our omnibus curriculum is our great books curriculum, and used quite internationally. I wonder if those would be have an American flair to them, or if they would be somewhat ubiquitous and would cross cultural bounds pretty well.
Well, I agree with your observation. I believe they will cross cultural boundaries. Yes, I believe you mentioned logic, rhetoric, grammar. Yes, I think that can be applicable, Marlon, in any country. Correct. Like you rightly said, probably the teaching of history and maybe even literature. We have many
Right.
Australian literary people that we can include. But yes, there are things that we can take away from America that we can obviously use in Australia by all means. And you're right, the great books are, for example, the great book, Plato will always be Plato. Whether you study him in Pennsylvania, whether you study him in Melbourne, Plato's Republic will always remain as Plato's
That's
Republic.
right.
So
Yeah.
I see the point you're making there. And you also mentioned the word pedagogies as well. Yeah, again, those pedagogical principles that I'm sure you have in yours, in America and in your schools will apply also in Australia as well. The Socratic teaching, the Socratic dialogue, mimetic teaching. I know it's a big word now that's coming out of your country, mimetic teaching. So we can have mimetic teaching here in Australia. You're right. It's not just something that's only confined to America or some other countries.
Right.
So I think to answer your question, the first thing we need to do is look at what can we take from your curriculum documents that already are applicable in our country. And I'm sure there are many. And then the next step will be, Marla, where do we need to modify, adapt,
Right.
so that it makes that, yeah. And as I said to you 5 minutes ago, that is a huge task. And I didn't say to your audience, we are all volunteers, Marlon. I mean, by the way, I'm a full-time teacher. We all do this in ACES in our weekends, after hours, at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock p.m. before we go to bed. We are spending our lives. Because a lot of us work in education, and look, a lot of us are not happy at the moment in many of the schools that we work. We want to offer something more beautiful. So we do this in our spare time. So, which sometimes can be a drawback. I wish, Marlon, that I can give more hours
Yeah.
to the growth of this movement. However, for that to happen, and I'll say this slightly, for that to happen, I need to get more people on board in Australia who realize and who understand, Mullen, my vision. Not my vision, the vision of ACES. So it's about the vision of ACES.
Right.
So to answer your question 10 minutes ago, we want to sell that vision to many Australians, first of all, so that they can get behind us and say, Kon, we're behind you. We're not quite at that stage yet. I know that in your country, you do have people who do get behind Veritas, who do get behind, the classical academic press, who do get behind these institutions, but not quite yet at our country.
Okay.
But it's beginning.
Well, we are excited to be better connected with time zones and Australian organizations and movements. We would welcome more connection and more interaction there. It has been wonderful to have you on our podcast. Thank you, Kon.
Thank you, Marlon. It's been an honor to speak to yourself, and I'd like to finish just by saying that I'm a big fan of I love the word dialogue. At the moment, you and I have been having a dialogue, and I just love the word dialogue. It's great just talking and conversing and learning, and from each other, and that's what I want to do more as the ACES president. And I would hope that as ACES grows, we want to have more dialogue, whether it be with Americans, whether it be with Australians, whether it be with anyone else around the world who wants to support this movement. But
Right.
Thank you, and may God bless yourself and the wonderful things that are happening in your countries that we look to and we say, wow. We all say here down under, wow, look what's happening in America. How did they get to that stage? And I know it would have been with hard work, determination, and people like yourself, visionaries, people with passion. So we need to find more of those people in our country, Marlon, so we can say to you 20 years from now that we too have a strong, solid movement.
Wonderful.
But I believe that the seeds have been sown. The seeds have been sown in our country, and it will just blossom.
Very good. Well, thank you for what you're doing. I'm sure it's much appreciated by many people. And folks, thank you for joining us on another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. We hope to see you next time. Kon, thank you.
Thank you.